Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for coming back promptly for our afternoon session. I just earwigged on a few of the conversations over lunch, and there's some really good ones carrying on from the session that we had immediately before lunch. So before we go to our final panel of the day, which is a good and important one, we've got an activity planned for each table, which will get us all thinking about the challenge that older people on a low income face when it comes to making money stretch. So the facilitators on each of your tables will explain the activity and answer any questions you have before the activity starts. We have the same facilitators as we had in the sessions before lunch, so do make sure you are on one of those tables. We are, of course, mindful that this could be triggering for people who have lived experience, and if so, just ask a member of IA staff. We do have a quiet room people can retreat to if that is a helpful thing to do. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the facilitators. Off you go.
Independent Age is outside the Tate Modern today, and we've got an ice sculpture of one of our campaigners, Rob. We're here trying to talk to the public and raise awareness about the fact that there are 2 million older people living in poverty, and this winter many of them are feeling frozen and forgotten.
I think this kind of really makes the point very strongly. It's a way of getting over, like, not just facts about something, but feelings.
I was drawn to it because it made us feel cold, and then when we actually saw the story, it became really interesting and opened a conversation.
It makes me feel really sad because I think this is the reality for a lot of older people who simply cannot afford to heat their homes.
I was absolutely blown away. I mean, the detail they've got there is fantastic. It's a very strong message that it's sending, that people are cold, that, you know, we need help. We need help.
Independent Age is outside the Tate Modern today, and we've got an ice sculpture of one of our campaigners, Rob. We're here trying to talk to the public and raise awareness about the fact that there are 2 million older people living in poverty, and this winter many of them are feeling frozen and forgotten.
I think this kind of really makes the point very strongly. It's a way of getting over, like, not just facts about something, but feelings.
I was drawn to it because it made us feel cold, and then when we actually saw the story, it became really interesting and opened a conversation.
It makes me feel really sad because I think this is the reality for a lot of older people who simply cannot afford to heat their homes.
I was absolutely blown away. I mean, the detail they've got there is fantastic. It's a very strong message that it's sending, that people are cold, that, you know, we need help. We need help.
Independent Age is outside the Tate Modern today, and we've got an ice sculpture of one of our campaigners, Rob. We're here trying to talk to the public and raise awareness about the fact that there are 2 million older people living in poverty, and this winter many of them are feeling frozen and forgotten.
I think this kind of really makes the point very strongly. It's a way of getting over, like, not just facts about something, but feelings.
I was drawn to it because it made us feel cold, and then when we actually saw the story, it became really interesting and opened a conversation.
It makes me feel really sad because I think this is the reality for a lot of older people who simply cannot afford to heat their homes.
I was absolutely blown away. I mean, the detail they've got there is fantastic. It's a very strong message that it's sending, that people are cold, that, you know, we need help. We need help.
Independent Age is outside the Tate Modern today, and we've got an ice sculpture of one of our campaigners, Rob. We're here trying to talk to the public and raise awareness about the fact that there are 2 million older people living in poverty, and this winter many of them are feeling frozen and forgotten.
I think this kind of really makes the point very strongly. It's a way of getting over, like, not just facts about something, but feelings.
I was drawn to it because it made us feel cold, and then when we actually saw the story, it became really interesting and opened a conversation.
It makes me feel really sad because I think this is the reality for a lot of older people who simply cannot afford to heat their homes.
I was absolutely blown away. I mean, the detail they've got there is fantastic. It's a very strong message that it's sending, that people are cold, that, you know, we need help. We need help.
It is unacceptable that anyone should live in poverty.
Poverty is detrimental to our society as a whole, and every day it deprives people of their choices, forcing them to make difficult decisions that can negatively impact their health, relationships, and dignity.
People of all ages and walks of life can experience poverty.
Financial struggles unite them for a decent quality of life.
Older people are not immune to financial hardship. Across the UK, 2 million pensioners live in poverty.
Cutting back on meals, living in damp, cold homes, and sitting in the dark to save money.
Too often, their voices aren't heard or acted on by those with the power to make change happen.
Too often, they are ignored or stigmatised, compounding their feelings of shame, hopelessness, and isolation.
Poverty in later life is not inevitable. It can be addressed.
We can improve our society and social security system so that it works for people of all ages.
To help achieve this, listen to the voices of older people in financial insecurity.
Share stories of pensioners living in poverty.
Support changes to reduce poverty in older age, ensuring a financially secure future for everyone.
Together, we will tackle pensioner poverty so that everyone has the opportunity to live well
With dignity,
choice, and purpose.
It is unacceptable that anyone should live in poverty.
Poverty is detrimental to our society as a whole, and every day it deprives people of their choices, forcing them to make difficult decisions that can negatively impact their health, relationships, and dignity.
People of all ages and walks of life can experience poverty.
Financial struggles unite them for a decent quality of life.
Older people are not immune to financial hardship. Across the UK, 2 million pensioners live in poverty.
Cutting back on meals, living in damp, cold homes, and sitting in the dark to save money.
Too often, their voices aren't heard or acted on by those with the power to make change happen.
Too often, they are ignored or stigmatised, compounding their feelings of shame, hopelessness, and isolation.
Poverty in later life is not inevitable. It can be addressed.
We can improve our society and social security system so that it works for people of all ages.
To help achieve this, listen to the voices of older people in financial insecurity.
Share stories of pensioners living in poverty.
Support changes to reduce poverty in older age, ensuring a financially secure future for everyone.
Together, we will tackle pensioner poverty so that everyone has the opportunity to live well
With dignity, choice,
and purpose.
It is unacceptable that anyone should live in poverty.
Poverty is detrimental to our society as a whole, and every day it deprives people of their choices, forcing them to make difficult decisions that can negatively impact their health, relationships, and dignity.
People of all ages and walks of life can experience poverty.
Financial struggles unite them for a decent quality of life.
Older people are not immune to financial hardship. Across the UK, 2 million pensioners live in poverty.
Cutting back on meals, living in damp, cold homes, and sitting in the dark to save money.
Too often, their voices aren't heard or acted on by those with the power to make change happen.
Too often they are ignored or stigmatised, compounding their
Inevitable. It can be addressed.
We can improve our society and social security system so that it works for people of all ages.
To help achieve this, listen to the voices.
Hello, facilitators. This is your reminder to move on to the next activity, please. And you've got 5 minutes for this one. Thank you.
Poverty in older age, ensuring a financially secure future for everyone.
Together, we will tackle pensioner poverty so that everyone has the opportunity to live well
With dignity, choice, and purpose.
It is unacceptable that anyone should live in poverty.
Poverty is detrimental to our society as a whole, and every day it deprives people of their choices, forcing them to make difficult decisions that can negatively impact their health, relationships, and dignity.
People of all ages and walks of life can experience poverty.
Financial struggles unite them for a decent quality of life.
Older people are not immune to financial hardship. Across the UK, 2 million pensioners live in poverty.
Cutting back on meals, living in damp, cold homes, and sitting in the dark to save money.
Too often, their voices aren't heard or acted on by those with the power to make change happen.
Too often they are ignored or stigmatised, compounding their feelings of shame, hopelessness and isolation.
Poverty in later life is not inevitable. It can be addressed.
We can improve our society and social security system so that it works for people of all ages.
To help achieve this, listen to the voices of older people in financial insecurity.
Share stories of pensioners living in poverty.
Support changes to reduce poverty in older age, ensuring a financially secure future for everyone.
Together, we will tackle pensioner poverty so that everyone has the opportunity to live well
With dignity, choice, and purpose.
It is unacceptable that anyone should live in poverty.
Poverty is detrimental.
Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
We're here today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
We're here today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
We're here today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
We're here today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they deserve.
The pensioners, people who've worked and paid taxes and had a good life before, but once they pension, they find that they're not affording anything.
We think it's so important that everyone who's entitled to pension credit receives it, and at the moment there are still hundreds of thousands of people missing out, and our analysis shows it's still over £1 billion a year that's not getting to the people entitled.
The government should be doing much more to help older people and those who qualify for pension credit. There are pensioners who right now are sitting with blankets over their knees and shawls around their shoulders. And that, I think, is immoral in one of the richest economies in the world.
We're here today at the Department for Work and Pensions to hand in an open letter that was signed by over 3,500 independent age campaigners that is calling for a pension credit uptake strategy because people aren't getting the pension credit that they
Thank you very much to everyone for taking part in that exercise. I hope you felt it was a useful thing to do. We really tried to design that to be insightful for those of us who don't have lived experience of poverty, but without trivialising, because these are important issues that people face. There were 4 different scenarios in the room, each of them showing different situations that people face. And we're going to hear very briefly from 3 of our facilitators to give us a little window into the conversation that happened on their tables. So Isabel, would you like to take it away for us, please?
Lada, thank you. Good memory.
I think so, because then we'll all hear you. Oops.
Great, thank you. So the scenario that we were looking at on my table was a couple where one was aged 65 and one was aged 68. So that meant that because the younger one was below state pension age, they couldn't together access pension age benefits such as pension credit. So they were quite reliant on universal credit and a small amount of pension that the older member of the couple had. So initially, when we talked through all of their bills and expenses, we actually found that the money that they had coming in wasn't enough to cover all of these things, and the table talked through a bit things that they might do to try to make their budget work out. And the second scenario was where their car failed its MOT and they had to pay for £250 worth of repairs. They needed the car in order to be able to get to medical appointments and things like that. So some of the things that were discussed on my table were whether they might be able to kind of seek out grants support or things like the household support fund. But we reflected that there was a bit of a postcode lottery in how much support people might be able to get from the household support fund. We also discussed that they might have to make some difficult decisions, such as selling their car, and instead, if they lived in an area where this was available, that they could hire a car on a case-by-case basis to get where they were going, but also, depending on their circumstances, that might not really work for them. And I think we just reflected generally that it was a very difficult situation for this couple to be in. They're in their late 60s and they're not able to enjoy life because their budget doesn't add up, and they're having to make really difficult choices. And then the final situation that they were in was that the younger member of the couple reached state pension age, so now they were now both over state pension age, and this made a real difference for them. Because it meant that they were able to start receiving pension credit as a couple, which increased their income and would mean that they'd be able to access extra support as well. And then they were then in a situation where after kind of all of their basic bills were covered, they had a certain amount of money left over, a couple of £100 per month, which we thought about how we could reallocate. There were some things that they initially weren't able to afford at all, such as saving for a holiday, buying new clothes, really kind of basic things that we were then able to allocate some money towards. And we also decided that it'd be useful for them to keep some of it aside in savings, because if the car broke down again, other unexpected costs, that they would have a bit of a buffer at that point. But I think the key thing was, the massive difference that them both reaching state pension age had, and how tough, just incredibly tough it would have been for them waiting for that moment to come and trying to get by on what they had coming in.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Really helpful and insightful. We're now going to turn to Nicola. Would you like to come and join us? Oh, you can do it from there if you like.
Okay, yes. Yeah, thank you. So our scenario was a couple who were both in receipt of state pension and both had a small workplace pension but hadn't been able to put much into their workplace pensions during their working lives. They had quite high housing costs. They live in Lambeth, so they're paying over £1,700 a month in rent. And we just about managed to break even in our first exercise, covering all of the household costs, bills, and their average monthly spending on food, but had almost nothing left to set money aside just in case. Very little for clothing, personal items, and certainly nothing for helping others. And we talked about, as well as charitable donations, things like if they had family members they might want to buy a birthday gift for example, that being impossible. Part of the scenario as well was because they live in Lambeth, they have freedom passes, so don't have to pay for public transport after 9:30 in the morning in London. But we did talk about, well, what if they've got family members who live further afield or they need to go out early? So, we sort of had a bit of discussion about that. The bombshell that was then dropped on this couple was that their rent was going to go up by £100 a month. And that suddenly changed the ability to break even. So then we were in a scenario with no savings, with no money for anything other than the absolute basics. Finally, we had some good news. The couple contacted a charity and learnt that they were eligible for housing benefit after having a welfare benefit check. And I think Joe advocated very hard for welfare benefit checks this morning. That brought their rent down to £480, which gave them over £1,700 more money in their pockets. And then we really struggled to decide how to allocate that because we felt super rich compared to before. And it meant that this couple now have some choices about putting some money aside for a holiday, doing some nice basic things with their family, and having enough money. We talked about, just enough to buy a warm winter coat and a good pair of shoes every year.
Thank you very much, Nicola, to you and your group. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Gabriel.
Thank you. So our person was a single person, a divorcee, who was paying off a mortgage on a home. They were getting the full state pension, but they didn't have any private pension, and their income meant they were just over the threshold for pension credit, about £15 over. So I think at the start we found that things were tight but manageable. Like there wasn't much money to spend on clothing and any kind of leisure activities, but I think our person was just about keeping things going. But then in the second scenario, basically they discovered that they were underpaying on their energy direct debit, and this meant they'd accrued debt, which they needed to clear, and the energy bill increased by £70 a month. So then we started having to look at really cutting back on the little bits of kind of leisure activity and the little bits of clothing expenses that we'd already put aside. And yeah, we then, in the third scenario, we phoned up for a benefit check and found that actually our person was not eligible to any extra support. So that was quite a sobering moment for us when we realised this was really the set situation now. This is there was no other support coming in, and this is what we'd have to deal with. And very quickly turned to conversations of quite major life changes, like potentially selling the house and downsizing, potentially bringing in a lodger into the house. And we cut back on things like a small amount of money put aside for home insurance, which would really leave this gentleman at risk if anything should happen in that house. So I think this situation underlined the kind of difficulties faced by people living alone in particular. He was purely reliant on his state pension, had no other income coming in, and also highlights the issues of people who are just kind of above the threshold for extra support. He was getting full state pension, but wasn't eligible for any pension credit. So yeah, was left very vulnerable to these changes. And yeah, very quickly turned to kind of having to make quite serious decisions and life changes. So yeah, that was our situation.
Thank you very much indeed, Gabriel. They're sobering scenarios, aren't they? And perhaps worth reminding ourselves that 1 in 8 people over state pension age is living just on their state pension. So the scenario you described is not unusual, Gabriel. I think those scenarios will stay with us, those of us who are working on those in our tables, and they probably should. So thanks so much, everyone, for entering into that. We're turning now to our final session of the day. We met earlier one of our ambassadors. We're really fortunate here at Independent Age to have amazing ambassadors. So Margaret, over there in the middle at the front, give us a wave, Margaret, chaired one of our sessions earlier, thank you. And we're honoured as well to have Sir Lee Lewis with us, and he's going to chair our next session. And any of you who know Lee will know that he was Permanent Secretary at the Department of Work and Pensions. So he's uniquely qualified to chair this important session, which looks at how we get to a state where all of us and all the people we care about and support across the UK have an adequate income to live on after state pension age. So I'm going to hand over to Lee and the panel. Thank you very much.
Everybody said hello. We're all in the right chairs. I'm number 4.
Wow.
No.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honour and a great privilege to have been asked to chair this final session of what sounds to have been an absolutely fascinating day. As you've just heard, my being introduced, I'm Lee Lewis. I was a civil servant for just short of 40 years, and latterly I was indeed the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Work and Pensions, till I retired from there in 2010, nearly 15 years ago. That gives me the luxury of saying it either happened after my time, or if it happened in my time, I can no longer remember it. So one way or another, I try and absolve myself of some responsibilities. Since retiring, I've done a number of things, taken on some private sector roles, but done a number of roles in the not-for-profit sector with organisations such as St Mungo's, the homelessness charity, Fair for All Finance, a charity which seeks to assist people in being able to borrow at affordable rates. But being an ambassador for independent age, as you've just heard from Joanna, is something which I was utterly delighted to be asked to take on. We've heard the context for today, even in those 3 short report backs from the groups. Nearly 2 million people in the UK live in poverty, and another million are living on low income just above the poverty line. And I think it's a simple truism that nobody should be forced to live in those circumstances. There can be many reasons why individuals are in those circumstances, but they should not be. And I hope that our panel are going to be able to help us in giving their own insights into some of the questions that arise. To introduce my panel members, we have, let us start on this side. We have, please would everyone introduce themselves?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Curry, and I am Director of the Pensions Policy Institute. We're an educational charity, but also very much a research organisation, and we do research into pensions and retirement income, which we hope will improve the standard of debate around pensions policy.
Hello, I am Dr. Daniela Jenkins. I am an academic at the University of Bristol. I'm also the chair of the Pensions Advisory Group for the Women's Budget Group that specifically looks at financial economic issues and how they impact women.
Hello, my name is Paul Lewis. I'm a journalist and broadcaster and have specialised in pensions and benefits and tax and things like that since my very first job, which was at Age Concern in 1974.
Wow, I didn't know that. Hello everybody, I'm Morgan Vine. I'm the Director of Policy and Influencing at Independent Age.
And we are hoping that Debbie Abrahams, who's the Labour MP for Oldham East, but also chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee and a former Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, is going to be able to join us, but we will see if she is able to do so. So, my plan, not a terribly sophisticated plan, is to ask my panellists to respond to 2 or 3 questions which we've sort of worked out a little bit in advance, and then, assuming that that doesn't take all of our time, to open this discussion up to you, our audience, to respond to things that you've heard, or simply raise issues that you would like to raise. It sounds to me as if we're in for a lively discussion. So my very first question, a sort of sighting shot, if you will, is to ask all of our panellists. Of course, we're all worried about older people who are living in reduced circumstances or in poverty, but are there particular groups, given that it's hard to prioritise everyone and to focus on everyone, are there particular groups that our panellists are worried about within that older population? Let me start with Daniela.
Thank you, Sally. Of course, you would expect me to speak about women, and when I talk about pensions, one of the points that I make is that the majority of pensioners from the first State Pensions Act back in 1908 were women, and always have been. And so it always strikes me when we talk about, oh, there's problems with women's pensions. Actually, when we talk about pensioners, we are primarily talking about women. So we're talking about pensions issues being issues which disproportionately affect women of all ages. They affect women in terms of their ability to be able to get a pension. So women are less likely to be able to be eligible for a full state pension, and there are lots of reasons for that. But also, we know that women have less, if at all, in terms of occupational pensions and pensions wealth. Women are less likely to have wealth at all in terms of investments. But, and this is what I always say, is the complete twist and the stinger in the tail is that women live longer. And so what we see is that women are much more likely to fall in the category of those who experience poverty in later life, partly because of all of those issues and challenges that they've had to face, whether that's divorce, whether that's lower pay, whether that's not being able to build up savings of their own, and then living more likely on their own, sometimes with greater degrees of sickness, but for longer in old age as well, on less money.
Daniela, thank you very much indeed. Paul, let me come to you next, please.
Yes, thanks. There are groups that worry me among pensioners, yes. I think tenants is one of them, and there's going to be a growing number of tenants. Tenants in the UK have almost no rights. They can be thrown out, their rent can be put up, and there's very little they can do about it. And the new Renters' Rights Bill will help a little, but it won't stop landlords throwing people out if they want to sell the property and perhaps sell it to their brother and bring in Airbnb people in the summer because it's a lot more profitable. So I think that lack of security of tenure for a growing number of older people is very worrying. And of course, we all know, I think, that rents are rising quite horrendously all over the country. And yet incomes, if you are retired, are very often fairly fixed, apart from the state pension. So I worry about them a lot. And I also worry about single people, because I was reading the other day about the singles tax. It's now becoming a thing that if you're single, there's a singles tax, which really means things affect you a lot more because you pay much the same or perhaps a bit less than a couple would pay for a hotel room or for your council tax or for whatever. And of course you have to manage on much less money. So I think single pensioners and tenants are the two groups that I think are struggling and form a great many of the people who are still poor, because as we heard, nearly 2 million pensioners are in poverty as defined. It was more than twice that many in the 70s and 80s when I was more involved with organisations like Age Concern. So it's gone down, but there is this group that are left who are still really struggling. The state pension isn't enough to live on, despite that interesting panel you had about how you might live on it. And I think that all those groups need special concern, and I think I would like to see more security of tenure for pensioners, for people over pension age, and I would like to see more consideration given to single people and the way that they might be supported better by local authorities and possibly by others as well. So those are my two concerns among that group of pensioners who undoubtedly are still very poor.
Thank you. Can I welcome Debbie Abrahams, Member of Parliament for Oldham East and Saddleworth, Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee and former Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And we're delighted that you've been able to join us. Debbie, we're just on the first question, which I've invited your fellow panellists to address, which is amongst those older people in later life who lack resources and lack income, are there groups that you are particularly worried about? And from Daniela was a rather passionate advocacy for women, and from Paul, both reference to tenants and single people. I'll give you a moment to get your breath back while I just go to others. So let me ask Chris, what do you think?
Thank you. Thanks very much. And I think there might be a degree of overlap in a lot of these answers as we go through. I mean, firstly, I agree very much with Paul on the challenges of renting in retirement. It's incredibly difficult. I don't think the benefit system is really set up to help people who are renting in retirement, and work that we've done at the Pensions Policy Institute suggests that that's going to be a very, very fast growing problem with probably just over 600,000 singles or couples in retirement currently living in private rented accommodation, and that likely to increase to around 2 million or so over the next 10 to 15 years. So there's a big wave of people coming through who are likely to have a very different experience from the majority of people at the moment. But the other group, I think, and this probably does come into the single and women's category as well, is those who have lived longest in retirement, so those who are furthest from state pension age, those who are getting into their 80s and 90s, where their incomes have been relatively stable, as Paul was saying, right the way through their retirement, but the world around them has changed so much, not just in the world they live in, but also their own personal worlds. their health, their living arrangements, their families, their social networks, all of those things are constantly changing. There's a perception, I think, that when you get to being over state pension age, that's it, you stay relatively static for the rest of your life. But the reality is people change and everything changes so quickly. So trying to help those people who have seen the most change in everything apart from their income is I think, a big challenge.
And of course, some of those people can also face great loneliness as they get older, which is non-financial, but also very, very challenging. Let me come to Morgan Vine, who has her day job working for Independent Age. So Morgan, what's your take on it, please?
Yeah, so one of the groups that I'd add to what others have said is a group that I know our advice colleagues have been hearing from more and more, and that's the group living on low income who currently don't qualify for any support financially. Particularly with the winter fuel payment, we got lots and lots of phone calls from people, and we did everything we could to try and find out if there were things they were eligible for, but they just weren't. There wasn't anything there. So with that in mind, that group need more support in terms of where those thresholds are and what people think is enough to live on, and how we can support that group. Because when you look at an income of £11,500, £12,000 a year, as many of you saw in the activity we just did, there's not a lot to go around. So maybe the thresholds that the government put in place need to be higher for certain things so we can get support to the group that need it, that group particularly.
Morgan, thank you. And Debbie, let me come to you, please.
So we've just completed our pensioner poverty inquiry, where many of the wonderful people here gave evidence to. So I'm really repeating what they told me in the session. So I don't know, for example, if disabled people might have already been mentioned. And I think given that today we've had the first reading of the Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment bill, one of the reasons I was late, so I do apologise to everyone. I think that this cohort of people needs to be very high in our minds, but also in terms of people from ethnic minority communities. I think it's that it's well understood that groups that were poor in working age are going to be poor in older life as well. So as much as we're focusing on the cohorts and the pensioners that we have now, we also need to be thinking more about pre-retirement, but also how can we make sure that working age poverty, which includes 8 million people in work, that we can address that, and that will have a big impact in terms of the longer term.
Thank you. Thank you. Some really thoughtful answers there and really thoughtful insights into the groups that our panellists are most concerned about. So if those are the groups we want to try and do something for, what is it we should be trying to do? So my second question to our panellists is, are there one or at most two? Anyone who goes into 14, I will sort of terribly politely cut them off. Are there at most one or two key and affordable changes that you believe could make a big difference to ensuring that older people in greatest need have an adequate income in later life? And why I've added the word affordable and affordable is perhaps the world has changed since I left Whitehall 15 years ago, but somehow I doubt it, or if it has, I think it's probably become more difficult. If you sit inside government at senior level, what you appreciate is there are vast demands on public resources and never sufficient public resources to meet all of those demands. So I don't think just sort of wish lists per se will take us very far. So let me ask all of our panellists, what are the one or two key and you believe affordable changes that should be made to the system? Chris, I'm going to start with you this time.
Nice, easy question. And I think, to be fair to you, Celine, it hasn't changed at all since you were last there 15 years ago. It's still exactly the same. I'm going to be quite broad, I think, in my answer here, because I think one of the challenges is there are so many different things that affect so many different areas, it's hard to just narrow it down. But I think one of the overriding needs for the system is for it to be simple. I think the real challenge at the moment is by trying to meet many different needs in many different ways in many different parts of the system, it becomes almost impossible to navigate. So I think just trying to take a step back and try and work out what is it that you're really trying to achieve. You could even just start with the state pension, for example. What is it you want the state pension to do? And then look at all the different aspects together. So don't just look at the state pension age or look at the triple lock indexation or look at how many qualifying years you have, but try and consider it all together in a holistic way with other things and say, what is it you want the state pension to do? And then work out how you can achieve that with one thing. So try and make it as simple as possible. We were having a discussion earlier about pension credit, and is it 243 questions you have to answer?
Yeah.
If you need guidance to help fill out a claim form, I'm suggesting it's probably not the right system to help people.
And I'm not sure it's my role to say amen to anything that our panelists say, but I'm going to say amen to that because to out myself even further, not only was I the Perm Sec at DWP for 5.5 years, I was the first ever Chief Executive at Job Centre Plus after its creation. And one of the problems of having such an unbelievably complex welfare system is not only do its customers find it terribly difficult to navigate, but so do our staff, so do the staff of government departments trying to deliver, and people do try very hard, trying to deliver the right entitlements at the right time. Morgan, over to you, please.
So I think touching on some of the things that were talked about in the first session of today from Yvonne and Khadija and Joe, we think that there could be an option for social tariffs, so looking at water and energy. Could more be done? So the postcode lottery in water is completely unacceptable. You live in Brighton, you could get £20 off your bill if you live on a low income. You live in Bognor Regis, you could get 50% off. So it's a huge, huge difference. And as Joe said this morning, you can't decide, well, you could move house if you wanted to try and get a different water company, but you can't switch like you can with other companies. So there's definitely something around water and energy bills. And also touching on Chris's point, sorting out some of the complexity in the system. There's already money out there that too many of the people that those of us in this room care about, money they don't receive that is already meant to be there, that they're already entitled to. And there are simple barriers to the system, really simple things like adding one box to Form A, which removes the need for the second form, which the government could do. And that wouldn't cost a lot, but it would make sure that the money gets to the people that we know need it, so that organisations like those of us in the room aren't spending hours and hours with the people that we support helping them navigate that system, and it can be incredibly off-putting for that group.
Thank you very much. Debbie, let me turn to you next, please.
Well, so I can't remember who mentioned in terms of private rented sector and more, Martin. Absolutely. That's something that's so important. We had a session in Parliament today which was particularly looking at the local housing allowance and how that hasn't really kept pace with rent. And for older people on fixed incomes, it's a massive issue. So more and more people relying on private rented housing. Their rent's going up, but their income's not. So it is a real issue. So we need to, the government needs to grapple that. But we also, and I absolutely agree with Morgan about the issues on social tariffs. And again, the energy costs have gone up so much, and the energy providers need to be held to account as well. But I get back to the previous point that there's also, we need to do more in terms of making sure that people during their working life are in the position to be able to save for their retirement. So I know I've got 3 in there. I hope that's acceptable.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul, let me come to you.
Paul,
next,
please.
I don't know that my solution is going to be affordable, Celie. I'm sorry about that. But when I was 23 and working at Age Concern, I worked out that you can end poverty very easily. You give people more money. And that principle has been carried on, because if you look at the pension that was paid in the 70s and the one that's paid now, it's gone up by about 75% in real terms. So pensioners now have much bigger pensions, and guess what? Poverty is less than it was in the 70s. So giving people more money is the simple answer. Now, I know, there are problems with the politicians face and problems that the Chancellor faces, but it really is dead easy. And how do you do it? Well, you look at what people need, and then you find a way to give extra money to the people who need it. And I don't mean a means test, because of course means tests always fail, except in the narrow sense that they save the Treasury money, because 700,000 pensioners don't claim the pension credit they could. So they work in that sense, but they don't work for the people who need them. They're very complicated, they're expensive to run, and they should not be necessary. You should not need a means test. You shouldn't have to go prove you're poor in order to get money. And the government is adopting this principle really with the winter fuel payment, because last year you had to prove you're poor. This year you have to prove you're not rich, which is a much better way of doing things. So we've now got this new middle class means test at a slightly lower level than the child benefit one. But you know, it's an interesting change. So everybody will get it. Some people may not need it, but that's the price we pay for making sure everyone who does need it gets it. So I think what is needed is a look at what people need in old age and then give them more money, because that is the only way to end poverty.
Oh, thank you. Last, in no sense least, Daniela, please.
In a lot of ways, I'm going to build on what you've said, but I take slight issue with something that you have said. And I often say this question about affordability, which is always a classic one, but I think we're losing sight of the bigger picture, that there are £3.6 trillion of assets under management in terms of pensions. With that much money up for grabs, it is an absolute scandal that anybody should be ending their life. Anybody should be in later life in poverty. This is really a distribution issue. It's not an affordability issue. It's a distribution issue. And so I entirely agree. And I think that there are different ways in which we might achieve that. I think we need to look again at this question of means testing. And I absolutely agree with you that there are lots of people who absolutely rightly want to live with dignity. But I think that we do absolutely need to make sure that we are targeting funds where they are most needed. And I think that we have the means, I think that we have the technology. I always say, I'm saddled with student debt, for example. I don't have to go and prove to the government how much I earn. They very quickly come in and take my money from me. We have the means by which to be able to calculate who needs what they need to without them having to come forward. We need to shift that burden of responsibility away from the individual to ask, from us to identify their needs, to be able to give them that money as and when they need it. And I think we do have the means there to be able to do that. We need the will, we need to leverage that technology, not for AI for big companies, but actually to use and leverage that technology for the means of the people, that they need that. And maybe we need to do away with this language around means testing. I also absolutely agree that we need to look at people who aren't yet at state pension age. And we need to really think about some questions about things like cliff edges, some of the examples that you gave about people who don't quite make the threshold for pensions credit. That is a really harsh drop-off. There are so many women who don't quite make that threshold, and that difference makes all the difference. I really think that we need to look at a staggered approach to the benefits that people get in later life. We need to better understand people's circumstances, and we need to target those funds to people who need them, to give them more money. The money is there. The problem is the distribution.
Thank you. And just, I think I was told when I was asked to do this, don't tell everybody your own views. You're here to act as the facilitator. But I've been good at sort of ignoring what I've been told to do for many years, so why stop now? I think one of the problems is sometimes the language we use. As soon as you use that term means testing, it becomes a pejorative term, and so it is, so very often. Distribution is in a sense different, because distribution is saying that, are you going to give everything to everyone, or are you going to try and take cognizance of those who are in greater need than others? Because in the end, as someone once said, far cleverer than me, to govern is to choose. My third and final question, and to the panel, and then we're going to come to you all, is a slightly different question, but one I know that Independent Age worries about all of the time and has done some remarkable work to support. What more could we do to ensure people are able to access the financial entitlements to which they are already entitled, because we know that an awful lot of people do not claim the benefits to which they are entitled. And that seems, in some ways, the reasons could be complex, little short of scandalous. So let's go to that third question. And who shall I invite to start on this one? Morgan, I'm going to come to you. Independent Age have done a huge amount in this.
Yeah, so I can give a bit of background to those in the room who are maybe a bit further away from some of this. So there has been lots of work done by multiple governments to try and raise awareness of the fact that there are financial entitlements out there if you're in later life living on a low income. So money has been put in, and there has been some results, and particularly inadvertently with the winter fuel payment, as will come as no shock, that was a trigger into people learning more about pension credit and the fact that they might be able to apply for it. So money's been put into awareness, but what I would say is that money hasn't really moved the dial on the people who receive it. So even now, as Paul said, there are 700,000 households, I think it's nearly 1 million individuals who are living on a low income, and for whatever reason, they are not receiving the pension credit they are entitled to. They are also not receiving the housing benefit, many of them, that they're entitled to, council tax reduction. So awareness is definitely a problem, but you can't always rely on the fact that you can build awareness to the point where everyone who needs it will then step forward. It's a huge thing for anyone at any age to speak to essentially a stranger, even if it's not a stranger, best case scenario, they might have a relationship with a community organisation, but to come forward and say, I don't have enough money to feed myself properly. I don't have enough money to wash myself as much as I would want to, or to wash myself well. That's a huge thing to do. And awareness will only take us to the point where those individuals then have to do that. With all of the stigma and the embarrassment and the shame that many older people tell us they feel when they need to step forward and say these things. So we would like to see the government look at ways to automate, to look at where the systems, as Daniela said, where can the systems join together? What can be made simpler? The pension credit form is hundreds of questions. It needs an advisor. That's better than the attendance allowance form, which some of our own advisors say is one of the most complicated things that they will go through with an older person to try and get them the money that they're entitled to. So awareness has a place, but I would say that we need to look at more innovative solutions. You know, the winter fuel payment has shown us things can be done. You can give people money and you can find a way to take it back from the people that you think need it less. So what more can the government do? And also, you know, others, local councils, companies, what more can we do to proactively identify people and make sure that they're getting what they're already entitled to? And one thing I thought might be useful to share, just an anecdote. We do a bit on council tax reduction, and I know our advisors talk to people about that. And when I've been out and about, I've said to people who I've been talking to, do you get council tax reduction? Because you're on pension credit, so you should get that as well. Oh no, my council tax bill's difficult, but you know, I do get the reduction, I get 20% off. But that's completely separate. So the people I speak to are talking about the single person discount, which is about 20% off. Council tax reduction will take your bill to nothing if you're on a low income, for example, if you're receiving pension credit. So there is more that all of us, including organisations, can do to make sure that that money is just put into the pocket of older people on low income, rather than forcing them to not only step forward, but to step forward multiple times and have to go through a very confusing and sometimes quite demeaning process.
Morgan, thank you. Joe, I'm going to come to you, but can I ask you, in answering exactly as you would, might you just want to say something, because you're in an incredibly influential position as chair of the Select Committee. Do you think the concept of auto-enrolment has any bearing here? It's always tempting to think that all public policy is a failure. It's not, actually. We have, as a country, under successive governments, done some very successful things. And one, in the late 2000s, was the introduction of occupational pension reform, which was based around automatic enrolment, so that employees are opted in to their employers' pension schemes unless they consciously decide to opt out. And you know what? The vast majority are now in rather than out. Might it be conceivable that, say, for pension credit, which is so important, that there is sufficient information in the system held by both local authorities and central government, that you could say that some huge groups would simply be opted in to pension credit unless they consciously said, no thank you?
That's certainly something that needs to be looked at. We need to make sure that there's a mechanism that can be used, as you will know as a former permanent secretary. So, and we can't. It would be too complicated to devise a new mechanism. So, what would be the mechanism to do that? How could the issues around data sharing potentially be overcome? But I'd like to put a plea in for the significant evidence that we got together as a result of not just having, as I say, wonderful people like this providing evidence to the committee, but also we went around the country, went up to Scotland, we went to Wales, we had a session in Manchester, we had people over from Liverpool as well to understand what they saw as the issues and why people aren't being able to access the entitlements that are there for them. A key thing, commonality from all of those groups was in terms of not just stigma, so people don't want to have to go through that process. So as a system, as a social security system, we need to look at how we behave in terms of one group of people, the impact, because these were working people before they became pensioners, and if they've been poor working people and have been told, you know, you're working, but if you're having to claim any social security, that's an issue for you. And you know, that's, people have used phrases like scrounger and shirker. So it has an impact then on how society as a whole perceives our social security system. So that's one thing, but also in terms of use people that they trust. That's the other thing. There's a lack of trust in the system, and that is not good. I always, when I was shadow work and pension secretary, I said we need to see our social security system in the same way we see the NHS. It is there for every one of us if we fall on hard times, if we become disabled, if we develop a long-term condition, when we retire, it's there for every one of us in those circumstances. And the vast majority of people look on that very, very seriously, and they don't abuse the system, and that's not necessarily the impression that they get. So about trust in communities where there are groups, and we, as I say, we had some fantastic examples of people that are doing, providing lunch groups and so on, who then bring somebody in and who gets to know them all, providing that welfare advice, who can also help them in their application, because there are still issues, and I'm thinking of my dad here, where digital exclusion is still a massive issue. So use trusted people who are already in the communities to spread the word, to assist in actually the administration of some of these things, because they are, as you rightly say, complicated. And then the system needs to sort itself out about making sure that people see it in the right way and providing that support.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul, let me come to you next, please.
Yes, thanks. When Steve Webb was Pensions Minister, was that after your time?
No, it was in my time.
It was in your time. You'll know about this then. He wanted to boost take-up of pension credit. So he got officials to work with other departments and drew up a list of, I think, a few thousand pensioners who they thought were entitled from publicly or data that the government held. And they just started giving them the pension credit. They added it to their bank accounts along with their state pension every 4 weeks. And then they told them what they were doing. And then at the end, they said, well, it's been 3 months. I think it was 3 months. I'm sorry, but we've now got to take this away from you unless you claim. And you know, a very small percentage actually went on to claim, as I recall. I haven't got the figures in my head, but you can find it. It's on the government website. So even if you pay it automatically, claiming after that puts people off. And I really support what you said, Celine. You've got the data, give it to everyone who's entitled. And okay, you might give it to a few people who technically wouldn't be if they filled in, how long's the form? 43 pages, I can't remember. If they filled in the form and declared every bit of savings and all their bits of income, they might not technically be able to get it. But you would give it to all those who were able, should have it, and you'd give it to a few more. As I said earlier, that's the price we all pay for making sure everyone who should have it gets it. And I would like to see automatic payment of that. Morgan mentioned the fact that if you're on pension credit, your council tax should be 0. Your rent, I think, should be 0, or effective, certainly close to 0. Make that automatic. If somebody is on pension credit, the local authority simply has to be told to reduce their council tax to 0. Ditto with their rent. And private landlords should be told to do that as well. I mean, it's not that difficult. It's not rocket science. It's just big data science, and that's something we're very good at. So I would scrap the, I'd like to scrap the means test, but leave that to one side. Scrap the application, work out who's eligible, and give it them. Just like we do with the state pension, though people technically have to claim, I know, but someone else works out what they'll get. So I think that would be the biggest advantage. And the other thing that is very successful is, and you'll probably know this from your work, that if you go into a street, and fuel poverty campaigns do this, they go into a street and they start talking to everybody in the street about reducing their fuel bills and all these things, and they always do a benefits check, and so many people get benefits that way because it's a local, a friendly face, someone who talks to them personally, and they said, and helps them claim, and they do start getting what they're entitled to. So that's a kind of small-scale way of doing it, but that is never going to cover the whole country because it's too expensive. So I would just like people to be given this, and then if a few people who don't really qualify get it, I don't care.
Thank you. Thank you. And as I just come to Daniela and Chris, I appeared before the Work and Pension Select Committee numerous times. I appeared before the PAC numerous times. What was my then department doing to ensure more people claimed benefit? And actually the story wasn't a bad story. It wasn't a department that didn't care or did nothing. It did an awful lot, but it didn't much shift the dial. That was the truth of it. And therefore, that's why perhaps, as I've got older myself, my radical side has appeared. I think I'm more interested in radical solutions as I age. Daniela, please.
In a lot of ways, there's not much that I can add to what everyone said. I think we're all sort of singing from the same song sheet, really, which is making sure that people have that access in a way that is accessible to them where they're at now. I really want to reiterate that point about shame, and it's definitely something that I've seen within research, which is people who worked their whole lives don't want to suddenly be seen as benefit claimants in older age, and that there is a real sense of shame around that. If I used to work in the civil service too, if I think about very pragmatic solutions, I was joking before about grandchildren being the sort of digital Sherpas, that they sort of help their grandparents to go online and do online banking and things like that, is actually reaching out to family members, community members, the types of people that actually can help your dad to actually get it done, or can help their nan or their granddad, and actually help targeting them with that information that at least can help people to access the system as they're at now.
Daniela, my 13-year-old grandson is my IT help desk. I promise you. Chris, over to you, please.
Not too much to add again. I think we're all agreed. Simplicity is important. Automation, where we can, is really important. And I think technology has a real opportunity to help with that. And I know there are people in the room who already offer services generally that help people go through to understand if they're entitled to benefits or not as part of doing that. One of the big challenges, I think, though, especially with pension credit and with housing benefit and council tax reduction as well, though, is that people may have claimed previously and not been entitled. The system, as I was talking in my first answer, people change and the system changes, and actually the way that the system evolves means that you might actually still think you're exactly the same position, but your income is not keeping pace with thresholds, or there are other things which you become entitled to. And so actually you may be eligible for something that 5 years ago you weren't eligible for. And so when you see an awareness campaign, you think, well, actually that's not me, I tried that. But actually, because the system is always evolving, there's always opportunities, I think, to help people to understand better and to maybe help them, and that's where the automation comes in. If automation is a step too far, one of the things actually that we've seen recently being talked about, not in the state pension and benefits sense, but in the private pension sense, which might be helpful and might be able to read across, is something called a mid-retirement MOT. So this is where one of the challenges that we have with people who have reached their pension age in the past 10 years, especially with a defined contribution pension, are having to make a whole host of different decisions right way through their retirement about what to do. And actually the idea of, at regular intervals, having someone check in or having them help to understand if they haven't made a decision yet, what might be something that would help them. Actually extending that and including the benefit situation as part of that as well might actually be a really good trigger for helping people before we get to the system where we'd all like to see, where it happens automatically.
Chris, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard a lot from our panel, but we have another 20 minutes or so. This is your opportunity, please. I think we have both roving microphones, but we also have a system called Slido, on which somehow, miraculously, questions may appear on this screen in front of me. So I'd invite you to ask questions or simply put points of view that you would like to be heard. Would you, two things please, would you just introduce yourself, say who you are, and would you please not speak at inordinate length, no matter how strongly you feel about the issue or the question. So who would like to go first? There's a gentleman there with his hand up, please.
Hello, Martin Cobback from Chasm at University of Birmingham. So, great discussion. I think there's quite a lot of agreement here about the solutions, and opt-out for social tariffs, opt-outs for benefits. So it's much more inclusively designed. I guess my question, and it might be mostly to Debbie, we've got vehicles right now discussing all of these issues. So you've got the child poverty strategy talking about opt-outs. You've got the financial inclusion strategy. How do we get this over the line? That is my big question, because these have been discussed for a long time.
How do we get these things over the line? I'm not going to ask everyone to respond to every question. Debbie, how do we get these things over the line?
Good question. So from in my capacity, both as Work and Pensions Select Committee Chair, but also as the joint chair of the Child Poverty Strategy Group, it's about making the case, and the way that we can make the case to the government is by making sure that we have compelling evidence. And I would say as well that you each have a role in terms of pestering your own MPs as well. So there are a number of ways you can make the argument, as you know, Martin. And as I say, from my perspective, I will be focusing in terms of what I can do within the capacity of the Work and Pensions Committee and the Child Poverty Inquiry. But Salim made a very good point in terms of governing is about choices. What we can do is make very clear what we think the options are. At the end of the day, it is down to governments. Everybody is aware, I hope, that select committees, they have an independent role to scrutinise government policy and hold the government to account. So we're not part of that decision-making process. We inform and hopefully influence.
And just a second view on getting things over the line. Daniela, getting things over the line, and then I'm going to move us on.
Taking me back to my implementation days, I think Morgan actually and Independent Age have really shown that when you crystallise around an issue, when you humanise an issue, that it really makes a difference in terms of having impact and making impact. And I think that there is a real need, when we understand how policy is delivered and when we make decisions about that, that we don't lose sight of lived experience
Absolutely.
of how people actually respond to that. It's so easy to say, well, these are the numbers and these are the tables and these are the actuarial tables and this is what it equals. And we don't actually understand what that feels like for an individual living that every single day. And I think the more that those voices come through, both when we're making decisions, when we're making calculations, as much as when we're implementing things, the more we can make sure that people don't fall between those cracks.
So can I just, I totally agree with Daniela. And one of the things is not everybody, every committee is the same, but something that, because of this reflected my previous work as a public health researcher about engagement. You know, there are different types of evidence, and having that evidence, that lived experience, and co-producing policy, absolutely essential. So I've tried to, as chair, make sure that all the inquiries that we're doing, we have that in it.
Thank you. I'm just going to actually, the questions that you're asking through the Slido system have come up. And one is addressed to me personally, so I'm going to try and answer it. Interested to ask Lee if he thinks there is anything deliberate about benefits being so difficult to access. It's a jolly interesting question. And I can only give you my experience from nearly 15 years ago. The simple answer is no. It would be wonderful to think that inside the DWP there are sort of this conspiracy, there are people, how do we make it even more difficult so we reduce expenditure? If only, because you could probably manage to change that. This is not all civil servants are perfect, far, far from it. But two things I might say, actually. First is, in a sense, we all have a responsibility, including parliamentarians, because our social security and welfare system has grown by accretion over decades and decades and decades. And each time you add something, I always remember the special rules for share fishermen. Every time you add something in, you add another set of rules and complexities. So that plea for simplicity we heard earlier. The other thing is, I think it would be wonderful, and Debbie, this is something that you and your committee can do, and the PAC can do. Sometimes as a very senior civil servant, when you're invited, it's a very strange word, invited, because you can't turn down the invitation, to appear before a select committee or the PAC, you are put through the third degree about small mistakes you have made or big mistakes you have made. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? But there is no premium for innovation. There's no premium for what are you actually doing? Big picture to make it better. And I think if there were more sessions asking more senior civil servants and ministers, okay, what is the real efforts that you are making to innovate, to change? We might start to change the dynamic. Who would like to ask our next question, please? Or shall I pick another one from here? I'll pick another one from here.
Then we've got the
we saw this morning that people would vote based on older people in poverty. If panellists, here we go, this is interesting, if panellists were leader of a political party, what would they put in their manifesto? So there we are. What would you put if you were the leader of a political party? You don't have to say which party you would like to be leader of. We will call a veil over that. What might you put in your manifesto, the one thing that you'd put in your manifesto in this area of reducing poverty and reducing lack of income amongst older people? Chris, you're now the leader of a political party.
Well, the obvious answer would be to retain the commitment to the triple lot going forward, which I think politically is going to be very hard to not do anyway. I think given what we've just seen over the winter fuel payments, it's very clear that despite, and this is very interesting, despite the perception out there of the wealth of pensioners, people still feel very strongly about it. And I say perception, and Paul, I'm going to not quite embarrass you, but I was on your programme, well, on Moneybox a few years ago, and I always remember, and it wasn't, you weren't presenting it, so it was good, but someone came on and was talking about claret swilling pensioners. And that was their idea and their description of what they thought a whole cohort, whole generations of people were like. And so I think, actually, alongside that commitment, I'd probably try and put some real examples. I think looking out there today, I'm sorry I missed the sessions this morning of the lived experience, but seeing the depictions that we had over lunch and reading some of those boxes, it's really clear that there is a whole range of experiences out there. And so actually trying to get people to understand that would be probably the first step.
Thank you. Paul, you've been presenting Moneybox for 25 years, but in this scenario, as from tomorrow morning, you're the leader of a political party instead.
Yeah, it's a shame. I'd have to give up Moneybox then, wouldn't I? Well, we had Brian Blessed on the programme once, and we pre-recorded him, and he shouted in his inimitable voice, "Just give them the money!" And I think that would be my manifesto. But I would also seriously make it clear that I would only put things in my manifesto that I could and would implement, and I wouldn't put things in it, and I would not leave out things that I was going to do anyway.
I'm going to leave Daniela to answer the question last, because she is, of all our panelists, the closest to being a person who could actually achieve this. Daniela.
I wasn't sure if you were saying about me becoming leader of a political party.
No, you've got to put yourself in that mindset for a moment.
Absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. The backbenchers will never get rid of me. No, funny enough, my one suggestion is actually very specific. And I would make auto-enrollment progressive. One of the things that I've seen is that auto-enrollment, which defaults people who are now of working age into occupational pension schemes, is a great thing. It has really brought up participation within occupational pension schemes. But what I have seen is that for those who are earning at or under the living wage, that actually their ability to be able to contribute is just a step too far. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they can't afford to. And actually, I think that we can make the system much more progressive by removing the need for those people to find contribution. But where do you find the money from? Well, those that earn more, their reward is their pay. They don't need to be rewarded with a higher degree of pension contribution from their employer. So actually, you could redistribute that contribution from higher earners so that lower earners don't have to take anything out of their pay packet every single month, but they're still building up their occupational pension. So that would be my one big change, is progressive auto-enrollment.
Morgan, so tomorrow morning you're going to have to tell Joanna that you're leaving independent age because you've decided to become the head of a political party. What would you put in the manifesto?
So I think I'd think about something around minimum income, so it touches on what Chris was saying earlier. At the moment, I don't know personally, and I don't think many of us in this room know, what we're trying to help people get to. What's the end game? What's the triple lock trying to achieve? What's social security trying to get to? We know that with the winter fuel payment, it was considered that if you were on around £12,000 a year, that was enough. But we all know that it isn't enough if you're living on that amount. So in Scotland, there's a lot of work being done at the moment on a minimum income guarantee. And it's similar, the calls we've got at the moment for UK government is, if you step back and you determine what are we trying to achieve, what do we think people need in later life to live well, to avoid poverty, how much of that will be made up through the state pension, because we can't expect the state pension to cover everything. But if you've only got the state pension and social security, it needs to get you to a certain point. And for some people, they won't need the social security. They'll have work pensions, private pensions, and hopefully more people, as Lee said, will be in that position, particularly with workplace pensions. But if we could agree that, which is sort of the equivalent of a minimum income guarantee, then you could make sure that the systems are set up to help people get there, which I don't think they are at the moment.
Thank you. Debbie, imagine yourself just for one moment, if you would like, as the leader of your political party. What would you put in your manifesto in this area?
This is a difficult one, isn't it, really? Because I am a loyal Labour MP. But I mentioned to you that before I became an MP, I was a public health consultant, and the field that I worked in was health inequalities. And we know that the relationship between poverty and inequality in particular, so it's not just, the low income that some groups experience, but it's also the difference between the highest incomes and low incomes that can make that difference in health inequalities. And something that the current pensions minister mentioned was that inequalities in older life have got worse. So although we've seen in absolute terms an increase in pensioner poverty is about 300,000, isn't it? Actual poverty rates in terms of different age groups, older people haven't seen the increases that, for example, child poverty and disabled people have. So as I say, that's why I became an MP, right, to address poverty, to address inequality. So that would be, of all cohorts, it can be done. We're still a very rich country. It is just about choices, isn't it? So, and what Daniela said, it's about more distribution.
Thank you. I think we've probably got time for one last question from the floor. My Slido has disappeared, but I can remember what was on it, so I will fill the gap. But yes, please, the gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Millie Brown.
I'm so sorry. No, it is you, but I just, my slide wasn't good enough.
It's okay, don't worry.
My apologies.
It's fine. I'm Millie Brown. I'm the Deputy Director for Homes at the Centre for Ageing Better. And just one thing I want to talk about, you kind of talked about it, Chris, about stereotypes of older people. And one group we haven't talked about today is owner-occupiers. I know the highest proportion of older people in the PRS are living in poverty, but actually 2.3 million owner-occupiers are now currently over 65 are living in poverty. And I just kind of wondered, do you think that's an overlooked group? Because it wasn't mentioned earlier. What can be done to support them? And will they ever be a focus of government policy? And I must say the solution is not to tell them to sell their house, because there is a lack of suitable housing for older people at the moment. But beside that, actually, what is a solution we can look to target that group and make sure they don't go into larger inequalities later in life?
And can I just ask you, as I put your question, which seems to be a really important one, because it's a big group, as you say, do you think that equity release has a role to play?
I think it's possible, but actually a lot of the people who are living in owner-occupied homes in poverty live in very poor quality homes. So how are you supposed to sell that home if it isn't that level of quality and they don't have the money to repair it? So it's a very complex situation, and they're all kind of integrated their health, the quality of their housing, and living in poverty. So how do we kind of, that particular group that currently aren't served with policy, how do we do that?
Thank you. A really good final question, I think. So I'm going to invite everyone on the panel to address it. So we're talking about owner-occupiers, not a small group at all. Morgan, you may know how many older people are owner-occupiers as a proportion of the population. So why don't I come to you first, because you may have some useful information on this, and then I will ask everyone else to respond.
Yeah, so although owner-occupiers haven't been raised as one of the groups, owner-occupiers will be women, they will have long-term conditions and disabilities, they will be carers. So many owner-occupiers will come under some of the other categories that we know puts people at more risk of poverty. So I think some of the solutions that we've been talking about today will hopefully support that group. The reason why Independent Age focused on private renters, and that was our focus when we first started, was because we knew that private renters were a group at huge risk that nobody thought existed. And every conversation we would have with people who talked about renting would speak about, oh, it's just a stepping stone, isn't it? It's not a very good stepping stone and people have a dreadful time, but it's just a stepping stone. And we were talking to people in their 80s who it's not a stepping stone. So that's one of the reasons why we focused on private renters, and including the fact that they have obviously hugely high poverty rates compared to people who own their own homes. But completely appreciate there are many people out there who they certainly, you know, we speak to people I know who are owner-occupiers. Some of them still have a mortgage, some of them have paid it off, but they don't have any money to cover things like, you know, a hole in the roof or a boiler breakdown. So they are definitely a group at risk, but I wonder if some of the interventions will touch that group because they fit into other categories of people.
Oh, please.
Yes, I mean, I tend to agree with what you said, Lee, initially, that I'm a great fan of equity release. Most journalists aren't, but I actually am. I think it's a very practical way of raising money. And even if the house is run down, I mean, there are certain types of property that they won't accept. But if it's a a freehold property sitting on a bit of land that you own, then most insurance companies will give you equity release. And of course, the older you are, the bigger percentage of the value of the home you can get. And that is certainly a way out of poverty. And I think one of the mindsets that has to be tackled is, oh, I want to leave it to my children or my nephew or somebody else. It's your property, you have paid for it. And most of the value is actually not what you paid for, it's a windfall, because the housing market in the UK is so bizarre that property prices have soared, and what you paid for it is a tiny fraction of what you can what it's actually worth and what you can borrow against it. And I spent a long time persuading my dear mother to take out equity release. She said, but we've paid off the mortgage, we don't want another one. And it took a long time to persuade her that this was a very sensible way to get some money which they needed in later life. So I'm a great fan of that. If you're an owner-occupier, borrow against the house, and if there's nothing left when you die, it doesn't matter.
Well, thank you. Chris, please.
Yeah, I'm loath to get into a discussion about the housing market in the UK because it's really problematic in so many different ways. I think the challenge with equity release is both regional, in that we often think about values of houses in the southeast and London, whereas if you look at the north and in the regions, actually the equity you could release is probably still relatively small based on the average house prices in those areas, and maybe those who are needing it aren't in average houses either. It's always difficult. And the other is the research that we've done that shows that housing wealth is generally very highly correlated with private pension wealth as well. So that people that have the most equity that they could release also have the biggest pensions, and so probably are least likely to need it in how that works. But I think as with all these things, the owner-occupied group is one that you can't look at as a single homogenous group. There's a whole wide range of experiences in there. And I think that's why it's probably dangerous for me to think that it's only the private rented sector we need to think about, because there's also the local authority rented sector, and social housing also has their issues. Owner-occupiers have their issues too, and so it's making sure that we can take account of all those different features when we're looking at the right answers.
Thank you. Daniela, please.
I think we have to look much more systemically at our housing stock. I live in Bristol, for example. There's a big housing boom at the moment, but you look at the houses that are being built, it's lots of, flats for genuinely the type of people that don't tend to live there, right? For, single or, couples who are living in high-rise black blocks in, very central locations within the city. I think as we are looking at a fantastic investment in new house building, I think we need to think about who can live there and who we are building homes for. Not housing stock for sale, but homes for. Accessible homes. Homes that are linked and connected to communities. Homes so that people don't have to cling on to a house that perhaps doesn't meet their needs anymore, but that they have those options so that other people can move into those homes, for example. So I think that we do need to think much more about housing, homes at a populational level and how we're meeting those needs and meeting that supply so that people do have actual access to houses and homes that meet their needs in later life as well.
Thank you. And last, in no sense least, Debbie, to you, and as chair of the Select Committee, you might want to add any final thoughts as well as to the discussion we've had as a whole, as well as addressing the actual specific question.
Thank you. Well, again, so much I can agree with here. I just mentioned something that I, as my first public health job, when I was working in Liverpool, and absolutely that was the situation there, because there was a lot going into decent homes and support for that in social housing and so on. And what the council that I worked with was trying to do was, when it came to refurbing a whole street, whether it was the house, whether it was the roofs or whatever, it would make sure that it would also approach the owner-occupier and see whether they could support them in actually having that deal to ultimately to make it more energy efficient home. Obviously, there's something that we're wanting to do, not just in terms of build more housing stock, but also in terms of retrofit existing housing stock. So we mustn't forget our own occupiers around that. And then the other things that we've mentioned in terms of making sure that people that need it, whatever their housing tenure, have access to schemes such as social tariffs, which will help them sort of reduce their costs as well. The other thing we haven't really talked about is social care, and you can forget retrofitting on the retrofitting. You can get equity release, if you are going to have to sell your home to pay for your care. So that we must get on with that, which hopefully we'll see the report from Louise Casey very soon.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found that final session interesting. I think we covered an awful lot of ground. I think we've had some very clear, thoughtful and honest answers actually from all of our panel. So I think we now come to the closing session of your day, our day. But before we move to that, could we, in our very traditional way, please thank all our panel members.
Thank you so much. You can stay if you like, because I'm just going to be a very few minutes before we close off the conference. I'm so grateful to that final panel. It was amazing, wasn't it? It was evidence-based, it was insightful, and it was compassionate. What more could you want from a panel? Thank you all so much. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists from today. So Yvonne and Khadija and Joe, Andy, who presented the polling, all the facilitators on the tables. What you did today is really appreciated. And the amazing Independent Age team who put it together. You're fantastic, and it wouldn't have happened without you. I'm going to abuse my chair's privilege very briefly, just to remind you what our key calls are, because you've heard them through the day, but let's just make sure we're really clear about them. I think we've all agreed, and now we know from the polling that the public agrees, how important these issues of older age poverty are. And the 5 things we think would make a difference, and we've heard them almost all in this panel and through the day, are a proper take-up strategy for the entitlements that people already have. But what if we manage to achieve that and the amount that people receive still isn't enough? As Paul said, let's have a proper look at what people need and ensure they get it. We heard from Debbie about the need for uprating the local housing allowance regularly so that people have the housing amount they need to live on. We're keen, as Morgan said, to ensure that utility companies and water introduce a single social tariff to reduce fuel and water poverty. And finally, of our calls, one we haven't heard much about today but sits in the background, is really important, is around ensuring the voice of older people is heard. So there are colleagues here today, I know from the Older People's Commissioner in Wales. They do a fabulous job. There is one of those commissioners in Northern Ireland. There isn't yet one in England or Scotland, and we would love to see that because we think it would make a big difference. So those are our 5 calls, and then we asked you to write a pledge, if you would, during the lunch break on things that you'd be prepared to do. So I'm just going to highlight a very few of those in 3 areas. So firstly, in community, somebody said they'd check in with their older neighbours. That's absolutely key. Somebody else said they'd reach out to ethnically diverse communities. So let's all take those 2 away. The second area was about amplifying voices. Spread the message and share stories that people have heard today were 2 of the pledges. And then finally, the third area is action. Somebody said they'd sign up to be an independent campaigner. There are 20,000 independent age campaigners out there. Thank you very much. If you're not one already, please sign up. And the final thing that somebody said in the area of action was tackle stigma. Again, we've heard a bit about that today. Let's make sure that we all do that. So I'm so grateful to everybody for everything that they've done today. We have a huge role to play together, and as we've seen with the Winter Fuel campaign, when we work together, we really can change things. So let's carry on doing that. We won't leave it a year before we're in touch with all of you to ask you to do a few more things. Thank you so much for coming. Safe journey home. And yeah, thanks.